bells are just wonderful reminders to stop. The mind goes, our speech goes, very busy. The bell invites us to just stop, relax, be here. So I invite you to invite that bell whenever you feel like it this morning.
How about right now?
Sure, do it again. So last week, and again the talk has just been posted on YouTube, but last week we began with a discussion of what is true happiness as opposed to what's conventionally sought after by so many people to be happy. You know, whether it's pleasurable experiences, which are all fine. Someone asked me after Sangha, you know, is it not good to want to eat tasty food or something? And of course not. We'd all prefer pleasurable experiences to unpleasurable experiences for sure. The teaching in Buddhism is just don't rely on these external experiences for happiness because they're impermanent. They come and they go. And we can find ourselves craving it. And even in craving something pleasurable, there's some suffering there, like just this feeling of wanting and not getting, or maybe we get it and we're afraid we're going to lose it. And you know, we eventually lose everything. We lose our health, we lose our youth, we lose our loved ones, and eventually this body, you know, also will disintegrate. So we want to learn to live with the view of what truly does bring lasting happiness. And it's really an inner happiness. It's learning to just come back into the body and mind, let go of the cravings, let go of the aversion, and just be open with a calm, spacious mind to whatever's happening. And you'll find as you rest in that place, and we'll play with that a little bit this morning, that there's a true peace, an ease, and a happiness just in just being without grabbing, pushing away. And there's a clarity, there's a wisdom. And for those of you who like to create, there's a real creativity there. We think our thoughts, you know, sometimes they just cycle around. We think we should be able to think of everything, but there's a real wisdom deeper down in this awareness that is just a wonderful place to engage in life from. And it's a way that brings happiness, warmth, connection, and love. And so the Buddha taught that, and he taught the Four Nutriments specifically as practices to help us cultivate that true happiness. And so these Four Nutriments are edible foods. So one is with the body, and that's what we talked about last week. And then the other three are factors of the mind, which we'll talk about today. So the body that we talked about last week, you know, it's very easy, as we discussed, to read lists of what to eat and what not to eat, even though those lists change from time to time. And now it's the ultra-processed foods we're not supposed to be eating. And, you know, we learn a lot about what's actually nutritious for the body and what's not, and that's important. And I think in discussion last week, we brought up why that's so important. But a lot of us do know basically what is good for us, but we don't do it, or we don't do it all the time. So what we came to last week was underlying how we specifically nourish the body is our relationship with the body, whether it's our physical body, the body of those other beings, or the body of this planet Earth. And when you love somebody dearly, if you have a child or someone in your life that you really want to take care of, maybe even it's your pet, you know, we want them to eat healthily and we care about them. But oftentimes we don't stop and care about our bodies that way, or about the earth. We don't see it. We see it as something to be used for our own kind of egoic pleasure. And so we looked and we reflected last week on, you know, just, between me and myself, what is my relationship with my body? Do I see it as something that's for ego gratification? I want it to look good. I want to be attractive. Again, there's not a problem with having a body that's energetic and looks good. We're human beings, but is that our primary motivation for our relationship with the body? We view it as something for self-gratification or sensual pleasure. Again, not knocking sensual pleasure, but just saying, is that our primary focus of how we use the body? Or in Buddhism, the primary focus would be body as a vehicle for waking up. Body as a vehicle for being of service to other people, to bringing happiness to others, which, was it either Dalai Lama or Shantideva, I can't remember, said, if you want to be happy, make others happy, serve others. That's the greatest happiness, because we get out of ourself and we serve others. And so do we want our body to be a vehicle for that type of happiness? And that's the view in Buddhism. And when you have that relationship with your body, you care for it. You appreciate it. It's only with me for who knows how many years. It's fragile. It's subject to sickness, old age, and death. But let me take care of this body. This earth is billions of years old, this universe, and I'm only here for who knows how long. So far, 68 years, and maybe a little bit longer. It's a flash to be in this body. So let me treat this body as something sacred, as with respect. And I shared that I had really sort of had a come to realization discussion with myself, on a solitary retreat a number of months ago, and I really took that. I think it's a reflection we really have to look at deeply, and it's just totally changed the way I make decisions about food. Suddenly the sugar cravings that, I battled for years, I would eat something unhealthy and then I'd just go exercise enough to get rid of those calories and kind of balance it all out, right? Or, we make deals with ourselves. Suddenly that struggle isn't there anymore, because instead of, what does the mind want, or sometimes we eat emotionally, it's like, no, what takes care of this vehicle? And so that's a much easier place to make choices from. So that was really kind of the gist of what we talked about last week. And we shared some mindful eating practices. I don't know if anybody had a chance to play with those, but Roshi Chosen Bays has a book on mindful eating. And she has practices ranging from, imagining all the people that brought you your food and giving them gratitude, to taking one bite at a time, putting the fork down, putting the utensil handle out, with a wish that all people who are hungry could share your food. She even had an exercise we talked about called "What's the Tongue Doing?" which can make you in awe of your body. And you watch just as you eat, that tongue gets busy, moving around the mouth, cleaning things up, moving food around. So there's a lot of things that were in her book that we talked about that we can use to practice with. So the body is important, but the Buddha taught that what's really king is mind. And so today we want to turn to, how am I feeding my mind? Because how we feed the mind can bring happiness, suffering, love, hate. I mean, the power of what's going on in here. And maybe you noticed a little bit during the guided meditation, if we start to watch what we're indulging in the mind, it can be quite interesting and helpful sometimes to say, wow, no wonder I feel a little depressed or a little irritated, because like a cow chewing its cud, I'm walking around chewing on these thoughts of resentment, or I'm worrying, I'm planning, I'm rehearsing conversations in my head. Anybody ever done that? It's just funny. You think, I've said this before, but if we had a loudspeaker attached to our thoughts and it could play it out loud, I mean, oh my God, that'd be horrifying, right? But we have to take this somewhat lightly, because, that's just the human mind. But we have the ability to change that. And it's not hard. We just have to turn the lights on and pay attention and be mindful. So we'll talk about that. What you find, maybe you did or didn't during meditation, because we did relax the mind a little bit first, but if you go through the day, you might notice that there is a voice in the head that's there all the time. It's like a narrative. And sometimes it's really quiet, but oftentimes it has something to say about everything. You know, they shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be walking like that in, meditation. We should have done this so the toilets didn't break. I mean, the mind can just have an opinion about everything. And it's a little hum that we don't notice because it's always there. But it's affecting our mood, and it's also covering up presence, which we'll talk about, which is, we have this natural clarity of mind. That's what the Buddha discovered. There's nothing different from him and us. We all are born with this innate, clear, aware mind. And as babies, there's no verbalization. There's just sort of awe. And then the baby will react when it needs its basic needs met. But it doesn't have stories. It doesn't have resentments. And we build that over time. We condition our mind through our life, and we just cover up that innate natural clarity that's always still there. It's just like a mirror that's just filthy, and we haven't cleaned it. And so we have the opportunity to do that. This clarity that's there, this innate, I use different words. We use presence, awareness, you hear natural mind, all kind of pointing to the same thing. It's not even a thing. They haven't started doing it yet in retreat, but in another day, they're all going to be feeling like their eyes are crossed and they're looking in the back of their head trying to find the mind. If you start looking for the mind, it's like, where is it? It's not a thing. You can't find it. And it's interesting because it's not just us meditators, scientists too. There's so many papers being written by neuroscientists, physicists, psychologists, and others. Like, what is the mind? What is consciousness? Does it come from the matter of the brain, or does the brain come and everything else come out of consciousness? And there's no real agreement. And it used to be that the scientific side thought, everything comes from the brain, but that's starting to shift. People are trying to prove it mathematically. That would be interesting. But there's it's a bit of a mystery. But it's always here, this awareness. So what we want to do as practitioners is, and this is the spiritual path, is begin to get familiar with this natural mind, because that's where the peace, the serenity, the wisdom is. We want to start learning to uncover it and realizing, well, what is it I'm doing that covers it up to begin with, and how can I change that? And so that's really what the three of the four nutriments, the last three that we'll talk about, that's what that's about. How do we nourish the mind so we're not covering up our natural, awake, beautiful awareness? So let's take a moment and see if we can maybe just touch in a little bit on what that clarity of mind feels like, because we've all felt it. We've all had situations in our life, it may be nature, maybe somewhere else, where we've experienced this, but then it gets covered over quickly. So I invite you to just take your meditation posture for a few minutes. Maybe close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. And just feel your body supported by the ground or the chair beneath you. So really feel that connection. We're bringing our attention into the body, just letting the body breathe naturally, but just kind of bringing your attention inward. And I'm going to offer a few invitations to reflect on. And you can just notice whatever arises for you. No need to try to search the mind for something, but just see if anything comes up. So first, just remembering a time when your mind felt clear, open, and at ease. And sometimes this might happen if we're walking on the beach, we're listening to beautiful music, we're gazing at the sky. Maybe there's something else for you, a time when your mind felt clear, open, at ease, and see if you can remember what that felt like in that situation. You didn't do anything to force it. You were just perhaps in nature. And see if you can remember, if something comes up, what that felt like in your mind, in your body. Maybe even now as you recall it. Or recall a moment in nature where you felt connected and spacious. So maybe you're watching bamboo leaves or other leaves of a tree shimmer in the wind. Maybe you're hearing a bird's song. Sometime when you felt very connected and spacious. Oftentimes in those moments, there's just a real feeling of openness, of spacious. Maybe everything just feels very simple, clear. Or bringing to mind a moment of stillness or silence. Maybe you're sitting alone somewhere, perhaps, by a stream, a river, in nature. Maybe resting by a fire. Just that feeling of ease that comes when you don't need to rush anywhere or solve anything at all. Or remembering a time with a pet or a loved one when your heart just softened. A love that's uncomplicated. You feel love for that other being. The heart softens. The mind naturally relaxes. So perhaps if you felt some recollection and sense of clarity and openness in this reflection, you realize it's not something that you have to go find outside yourself. This is just already within us. It's waiting to be noticed. You know, every time we pause and just take a conscious breath, we come back to this place. It's always here. So this is your natural mind. It's clear, it's awake, it's open. So when you're ready, opening your eyes. And I'm curious, so whether you could bring it up here or you recollect other times in your life, can you touch into that natural mind, even if just really briefly? Anyone able to just sort of touch that experience? You can nod if you do, and yeah. You know, the busier we stay, the more busy our mind stays, the less often we touch into that spot. Because again, we're covering it up. But if you can learn from your own experience, it's always there and it's always available. And the reason we do this is because to make a change, you have to have an incentive, right? You've got to want something to be different. It could be like, who cares what she's saying? It sounds like a bunch of religious, spiritual mumbo jumbo, you know? You know, you may think, it works for other people, but I'm busy. I've got things to do in life. But once we taste something and we know it's good, when you get into that space, there's a feeling that everything's perfect. You know, just at that moment. And when you touch your natural mind, and this is what people find in meditation, it becomes more than an experience. It can become what we live from. So no matter what's happening, you know, we have this equanimity because we're not relating to life from our thoughts and our reactivity. We're relating to life from this underlying natural mind, this awareness that itself is peaceful. And from that place, we can respond wisely. So you want to get a taste of that, and that's a really good reason why we meditate, or we walk in nature, or we sit by the fire, or we connect with those we love, because these are all so many ways of just opening the heart and bringing us to a place where we know that this is true happiness. And so that incentivizes us, that encourages us to practice. You know, then we want that. So that's important to have that motivation. So how do we make the shift from feeling agitated, maybe trapped in our thoughts, ensnared, to living in this more spacious, open-minded way? And this is where the Buddha said you have to nourish the mind. You know, you've got to feed, just like you have to feed your body. If you want a healthy body, you've got to feed it good, nutritious food. If you want a healthy mind, we've got to nourish it as well. And so after the first nutriment of edible foods, he talked about 3 more nutriments. How do we nourish the mind? And so the 3 are, and we're going to talk about each one individually briefly, sensory impressions. So from the outside, everything we take in through the eyes, the nose, the ear, the tongue, the body, all of those are sensory impressions that come into the mind, and they affect how we feel. They affect the quality of the mind. So these are coming from the outside, and then within the mind already we have what we call intentions and consciousness. So intentions mean we're living from some kind of motivations, whether we see it or not. And again, we'll talk more about that. What are these intentions? Are we living from intentions of wanting to be kind and love people and, you know, be connected, be patient, be understanding? Or are we living from intentions to make money, to get ahead, to be famous? And we may think we have certain aspirations, but if we look at what we do with our time, we may find out, I'm not actually being motivated by maybe what would make me happiest, and I need to look at that. And then the final of these nutriments is consciousness, and this is really, what do we dwell on? What is in the privacy of my mind, what's swirling around in there in terms of thoughts, emotions, because I am feeding on that all day long. So the first of the three that I mentioned are sensory impressions. Like, what are we taking in? What are we eating with the mind from the outside that's coming into consciousness? And, two important things to look at are, what am I eating and how much am I eating? So it's very much like our body, right? You can eat a lot of things that are good for you, but if you eat too much, you're going to feel overstuffed. It could actually, too much of a good thing can happen sometimes. So we want to look at what and how much. And in looking at what, sensory impressions, it used to be that there were, when I was young, there were, I think, 3 channels, and the news was either the Huntley-Brinkley report or Walter Cronkite. You had sort of 2 choices, and it came on at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and that was it. Maybe they had a recap at 10. Today, news is endless, and yeah, we want to know what's going on. We are citizens, we vote, we want to, live in an informed way, but how often do you check the news during the day? Particularly when it's online, right? How many times do you click on the New York Times or go to CNN or Fox or whatever you listen to? How often are you checking the news? And if you look at the headlines, I go to the New York Times online a lot, and I'm always looking for something happy. It's hard to find something happy sometimes in their headlines. There's a lot of doom and gloom, and it's interesting, but it hooks us in, and then it starts, all of a sudden, we don't just have our thoughts in our head, we're eating up collective thoughts of everybody else. Now I'm reading what this guy thinks and this woman thinks, or you can listen to them now. You don't even have to read it. You can click on and they'll read it to you. So we are consuming information just astronomically higher rates than we did, 10 years ago even. So we have to look at, what am I taking in, and is it supporting my well-being? Because our nutrition is all about what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. So wholesome supports true happiness and well-being. And it's not to say we push out something just because it's negative, because we want to be informed. But how much of it do we need, of these toxic stories, of mean speech and fighting between this one and that one? So, really looking at, what am I taking in when I'm reading the news over and over again? Is that making my mind peaceful, or is it agitating my mind? Some people say they can't even read the news anymore. It's so agitating. Their diet is no news. They've kind of gone cold turkey. We watch movies. These days, I think for a lot of people, it's reels. So whether you're on YouTube or Instagram, one more cute puppy or talking dog or all these things that happen. Guilty as charged. I've watched a number of them too, and they're kind of addictive sometimes. They can be funny, entertaining, but how many SNLs do you need to watch? Really. So we just need to stop and say, entertainment's fine, right? But how much time am I spending on this? It's moderation, it's balance, and is what I'm taking in, so much as making fun of this one at that one's expense. What's that doing to my mind? Is that creating a kind and loving mind, or is that creating a, type of an attitude in us? So we just want to look at the impact. Video games, solitaire, all the things people play. So there's so much electronically that's going on. And some of it's very good. Some of it is nourishing. Some of it's quite beautiful. There are plenty of beautiful movies and documentaries and things that do nourish us. So again, not to say that anything is per se bad. It's just personally, is this taking my mind in the direction that I want my mind to be in? If I want my mind to be a mind of love, of peace, of patience and understanding, is this the food I want to feed that kind of mind or not? Gossip is a big one. Taking in gossipy conversations, or this one's talking about that one, that tends to feed ego. We're comparing, we're putting this one down. Music, many nutritious music, you can be feeding yourself beautiful music, poetry, good books. Social media, So there's so much written that you've probably all seen about the impact of social media, that it deserves its own little call out here. Technology and social media have been wonderful at connecting people who don't have another way to connect with others. So there's some good aspects of that. But specifically from a Dharma perspective, it's interesting, what does social media feed oftentimes? And a lot of this has, been documented with teenage girls. Higher rates of mental illness, depression, anxiety, self-harming, and suicide, particularly among girls, teenage girls, it's risen. And there are other factors involved too, so this is not to blame social media for everything, but there's a very high correlation since, I think, 2012 or 2014, when Instagram really got big, and these rates of harm, because from a Buddhist perspective, what's actually happening with a lot of what's happening on social media? Buddhism talks about the three poisons of the mind. So this is the unwholesome that we're trying not to feed. So craving on social media, we're craving maybe likes, attention, approval. That's big, particularly for teenagers. Or aversion, jealousy, FOMO, the fear of missing out. Everybody else is with people at weddings. Here I am alone. It gives people feelings that everybody else is having a great life and a great time and has a lot of friends, and here I am. And it makes people just feel more lonely and disconnected sometimes, or excluded. Or it can fuel outrage. We go into our little echo chambers, and people agree or disagree, and we get outraged, and people will post things anonymously on YouTube that they probably never would have said within a group of people. So there's a lot of that going on with aversion. And then delusion, a false sense of identity. It's just interesting when you go anywhere to see how everybody's got a phone, and they're all taking pictures of themselves if you go to, more sort of touristy type places. But it creates this feeling of I have to have an image, I'm doing these postings, and then people are comparing themselves to others. So it's a big one with technology and with social media. So with sensory impressions, it's pretty common sense if we just stop and pay attention. And again, we might stop and pay attention and say, but I like to watch those reels, they're fun. And again, it's not to say we can't have some enjoyment, but let's just really be honest. What kind of mind do I want to have? And is this aligned with creating that mind? Maybe a little bit of this is, but how much? So it's something to look at. The other thing with sensory impressions is we overfill the mind. So even if it's not per se harmful, whatever we're doing, the fact is we're so used to stimulating the mind 24/7 now that we don't want to be bored. And when we talked about food last week, we talked about eating for emotional reasons, and I'm not sure if I really brought up boredom, but we have a mind that is so used to these dopamine hits, so used to stimulation, that when it's not having it, it seeks it. So it's like an addiction. And so if we just have to sit still for a moment and wait in line, we take out our phone and start checking our email or our text, right? Just notice in your own behavior, maybe it's present, maybe it's not, but you'll certainly see it with others that we've conditioned ourselves through technology mostly that we don't have to be unstimulated for a minute. And when we're doing that, we're covering up the natural mind. Maybe we're also not feeling something we don't want to feel. There could be a lot of reasons why the mind just wants to stay busy. And that's kind of beyond the talk today, but just to be aware that if the mind never gets quiet, you won't access that feeling you have when you're hiking or you're watching a sunset or you're sitting by the beach. That peacefulness, it's covered over. So we need to reduce consumption, need to learn to stay with what feels like boredom or restlessness, because there's something much better beneath that if we just stay. But it doesn't feel comfortable at first, right? So it's a practice. The third nutriment, so that was sensory impression, and now the other two are like things that are already present in the mind. And so this nutriment of volition or intention, motivation, in our minds, we have things that motivate us, that motivate our behavior. And we might say, oh, what's most important to me is my family. I love my children, I want to be home with them, I want to spend time with them, but then I'm at the office all the time. And so our behavior tells the truth. What are the motivations, the intentions that are really driving us? And it bears looking at. It may be an interesting exercise to just take some time this week and look at, where do I really spend my time? What is it that is driving me? Is it, I don't want to look bad, so I spend a lot of energy. Maybe I'm a perfectionist. I spend a lot of time rehearsing things or doing things that could have been done, but I just keep at it to make sure that I get approval or that it's, whatever it is. But it's just something to know about ourselves, because if that's what's driving us and we think what really would make us happy is to just be a person who's kind and loving, at the end of the day, we're all going to die, right? And we're going to have accomplishments and we're going to have failures. But what really matters to people on their deathbed, they say, is love, feeling connected with people. And so if that's really important to us, we need to think about that. We need to actually juice up the aspirations that we think are really important and not be driven by these other, making money, being successful. And, there's nothing wrong with, pursuing those types of things, but we get so out of balance. So, with me, I find it really helpful in this particular area to have somebody in my head who just reminds me all the time, who I think models what to me is most important about how I want to show up. Because left to my own devices, I'm a doer. I go do this and do that. And it's all stemming from this sense of accomplishment and, it's ego, really. So for me, it's the Dalai Lama. And I almost brought the picture in. I brought it in a lot for retreats, and Fred's used it a few times, but I have this big Dalai Lama poster in my bedroom at home that says, it's this picture, and it says, be kind whenever possible, period. It is always possible, period. And, this past week, I had to remind myself of that so many times, because I single-handedly took our website down on Wednesday night and then disabled all the email on Thursday morning. I thought I was doing something helpful for the community with Google, but I didn't know what I was doing, actually, and we got it fixed. But I'm on the phone with one customer service person after the other, and I've also got ChatGPT, so I sort of do know what I did wrong and what needs to be fixed. And now I'm talking to this one and being transferred and just finding irritation coming up. And I just looked at that picture and said, nope, the standard is, it is always possible. And that is so helpful, because it just reminds you, because we justify everything. Well, wouldn't anybody be irritated in a situation like this? Or, maybe I deserve to feel like this. And no, one of the people I admire most in the world says, no, you always be kind. People are doing the best they can, and I created the problem anyway, but yeah, and it was so helpful. And then I found I could be kind, and it feels so much better to be kind than to be impatient or be irritable. So in volition, I would say, have someone. Maybe it's Mrs. Jones, the third grade teacher. Maybe it's your teacher Fred, maybe it's your Aunt Ruth, maybe it's a spiritual figure, but finding somebody who, and I've got several people like that I turn to in my mind that are the North Star for how I want to be and how would they act in this situation is so, so helpful. And that helps move us away from the motivations that are maybe pushing us in an unhealthy consumption to a much more positive, aligned direction with the way we really want to show up. Now, you have to be convinced that that's really how you want to show up. I mean, why do you even want to be kind? If you don't buy into, like, who cares about kindness? That's for sissies, I don't want to be kind. That doesn't get you very far. And I think there's a lot of people who think that in the world. But, when we stop, I mean, you have to go through a process with ourselves sometimes. So I'd go through a process to say, I know the Buddhist teachings on cause and effect, that everybody is doing what they're doing because of their conditioning. They think this is going to make them happy, and a lot of times it doesn't, because they're focused on worldly pleasures, and it just doesn't last. But when you see that, wow, if I didn't have these dharmic teachings, I'd be doing that too. Your heart opens with compassion, and then you think, these people are suffering, and kindness naturally comes forward. So I guess what I'm saying is, you don't just tell yourself you want to be a certain way because it sounds like the way you should be. You want to feel that in your heart, and sometimes it takes some deep reflection. Why does this make me happy? Why is this really meaningful for me to be driven by this motivation? And then keep your North Star person close at hand. Sometimes I've felt him, in my imagination, on the cushion beside me. And it's really helpful to know that we all share this same ultimate mind and consciousness. We all manifest in different creative ways in our bodies, but we do share that same mind. And so we have the same qualities that the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh or Jesus or whoever is meaningful for you. We have those same qualities of mind. And by having someone in the mind who really embodies that, it helps bring them out in us too, and helps really kind of align how we live from motivation. David said he's just getting comfortable, for those of you online. And so these 4 nutriments that we've been talking about last week and this week, again, it was edible foods last week, and then we just talked about sensory impressions coming from the outside into the mind. We talked about volition, intention, motivation, like what is it that has an energy in the mind that's driving our behavior and our consumption. And then the last one is what's called, the term used is consciousness, but really it's what is it that's whirling around in the mind that we chew on? So, and the big part of that is thoughts. With thoughts come emotions. With thoughts come feelings of pleasant or unpleasant. But we look first of all at the thoughts. What kind of thoughts am I eating during the day? And so, in our opening meditation this morning, we don't normally do this, but I thought it might be interesting to have you just stop and just look at your mind for a few minutes to see if I just let thoughts come and go, what comes up? Is there a theme in my mind of future or past, of planning, complaining, worry? And is it even a voice, like a tone of voice in the head? Is there a harsh voice, or is it my mother's voice or somebody else's voice? Sometimes people are surprised when they're like, I hear my mother's voice and she's criticizing me. Is it a critical voice? Is it a supportive voice? So it's really important in looking at this last nutriment of consciousness to realize that the practice is to look inward and notice, what is the mind chewing on, and is it nourishing you? And so, depending on the voice, ultimately, having a lot of thoughts is not very helpful, period. Whether they're kind thoughts or unkind thoughts. And that's not to say thoughts aren't wonderful. We create government, education, health systems, everything from thoughts. So that's a wonderful capacity of human beings. But if you watch your own mind throughout the day, how many of those thoughts are those kind of thoughts, or how many are junk thoughts? Like, what's really happening? And the junk thoughts, remember, again, we're covering awareness. So I'm just curious if anybody is willing to share, when we did that meditation, if you remember, did you notice like any kind of theme of thoughts? Or maybe just if you think back about what your normal day is like, if you can remember, like, what kind of thoughts go through your mind? Are there themes, and what's the voice like? What have you noticed? So if you raise your hand, and there's, I think, Greg in the back. Dion, can I take you to the mic?
So I think for me, I am an ADHD autistic individual, so sensory is a big thing for me. But I think one of the things that has really helped me is, like, I'm a very driven person when it comes to accomplishing tasks. Like, I find a lot of satisfaction in just kind of like pebbling and finishing even small things. But sometimes it can get a bit overwhelming, and I love the talk on these three nourishments, especially because I feel like they feed into each other. You know, sometimes what you're taking in affects and shifts your intentions, which can then in turn shift the consciousness that you have. And I've found it very helpful to create almost like a small ritual that I do for myself when I feel myself drifting and kind of being swept away by the current of these three nourishments, or lack of. And so I've found that, like, 3 deep breaths, and then what I'll do is I'll close my eyes and I'll go into Plum Village, if you guys have seen that app, and just listen to one talk, one of the short talks that are like 5 minutes or under. And then I'll take a couple of minutes to like sit and just focus on breath and reflect on that, and try to move my mind into something that's like a positive nourishment. And I didn't really have words for it until this, but I've found it very helpful because we're just, you know, it's a turbulent environment in today's world with technology and news, like you were talking about, and the way that everything can kind of sweep you away. Having a way, like a rock in a turbulent river to be able to like sit on and just ground yourself can be a really good way to focus on these nourishments and kind of sweep away the things that are detracting from them, and focusing on kind of replenishing that calm, that grounding, and that mindful spiritual energy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we've talked a lot about kind of unwholesome, but I appreciate you bringing up wholesome, because every one of us is different. I mean, some people can watch really horror movies that I would never watch. It's like I can't watch a movie where someone does something really awful to another person. I can watch people from outer space and things like that, but certain things. But other people might watch something and say there's something very deep that they got from it. So we're all different, and so this isn't a judgment on what we're consuming, but we need to know our minds, and it's a practice to learn to see, what am I taking in, and what's wholesome and what's not. And in those moments, just like you're saying, in those moments where we feel overwhelmed, always coming back to the breath, whether you do it yourself or you use Plum Village app or one of the other apps, can really be helpful. Doing loving kindness can be wonderful. Oftentimes sitting down to meditate, maybe what you need at that moment is not more concentration practice. Maybe your heart is closed off, and what we need, and I find this a lot, like, I feel like I've been short with someone or kind of impatient, and just sitting down can totally, within the mind, can change the whole direction of the thoughts and the emotions by feeding something very nourishing like loving kindness meditation, or sometimes going for a walk, just having a cup of tea. There's a lot of beautiful ways to nourish the mind, but sometimes we think we're too busy. And we need to take care of this mind, because it's ultimately our source of happiness. Was there someone else who? Yes.
For me, my reflection was when we were doing the walking meditation. At some point, the question was asked, am I in the future? Am I in the past? And I was 3 minutes ahead. So I was at my seat, or when will I be at my seat? Because I believe we typically go around once. I take a restroom break, And I know that process, and I was like, okay, when am I supposed to go to my seat? And my anchor, who typically is walking with me, wasn't there. And I looked at the beautiful shirt of the lady in front of me, and I said, I'm here, I'm safe, she's in front of me.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm in this process. So. But I was like, and then we as a organism had a little stops and starts too, as a whole, but I was like, okay, I'm here.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, when we watch our mind, even if it's just 3 minutes, how easily we lean into the future. And there's a sense of like, this moment isn't enough. You know, I was walking in the garden this morning, and I'm leaving in a week to go to Asheville for a couple of weeks, and I found myself in the future thinking about, oh, this time next week I'll be on my way. And I thought, what is it about this moment that isn't enough? This moment is enough, you know, but we so often live in our thoughts of pleasure, of, oh, an experience I want to have, and we're missing the experience of being right here. And then I look and there's, I don't know what the plant is, I think it's like a sea grape or something that has all these beads of dew on it, and it was beautiful right there. And it's like, this moment is perfect as it is. And we are conditioned, I think, a lot by our society to always want something else. So a big part of sensory impressions we didn't really talk about, I'm glad we're talking about this, is advertising. You know, because we buy things sometimes because we need them, but a lot of advertising is aimed at making us think we need something to be a better us or to be happier. And if only I have this new car, this new job, this new house, these windows, whatever. And so we get conditioned to thinking that now is not enough and that I'll be happy when this happens. And simple is beautiful. And when we remember that, it's very helpful. Thank you for sharing.
Angie?
Yes.
Shobha would like to say that the talk today helped her not to push away boredom.
Not to push away boredom. Thank you, Shobha, for that comment. I mean, it is so easy to want to push away boredom. You know, I think when we were younger, you know, we just went outside and played. And we made up things, we used our imagination, you know, or we're just lazy sometimes. But these days, like I said before, the mind is so conditioned to being stimulated, and it's actually physiological. This is all I know about dopamine, that it's dopamine. It's these hits that feels good, and it makes us want another one. So we just look for stimulation. We watch one more reel, we play one more game. We're always filling up the mind. So we're fighting against the tide of the culture, in a sense, that says you never have to be bored. Just to look again deeper, to say, actually, there's something much more peaceful and lasting and solid beneath that feeding the boredom itch, and that is the natural mind. Yes. Is the green light on? Okay.
Okay. I've recognized that I engage in a lot of rumination, so I think a lot about past mistakes. And I think that comes from a place of like not behaving in a way that was aligned with who I am. So I found it to be very helpful to try and be more intentional with things and just try and come back to the moment as much as possible. I'm so nervous sharing right now, but that's all I can.
I appreciate you doing that, because that's really important, you know, and it's a big point, because rumination, we wonder sometimes like, oh, you know, we know it makes us suffer. And Buddhism says it's good to have regret. That guilt is not something that happens in Buddhism, because we are all conditioned by the past ourselves. We show up based on all our past causes and conditions, and we're doing the best we could. And if we could do better, we would. And then, yes, sometimes we look back and say, wow, that didn't work out so well. And if I had a chance, I'd do it differently again, right? So it's good to reflect once or twice and learn, which it sounds like is what you're doing, and then not to keep covering that ground, because it just, it's not helpful. And we want to have compassion for ourselves and understanding that we're doing the best we can. We make mistakes sometimes, despite our best intentions, and we learn. We're human beings, so thank you. I wanted to just kind of end with, I'm conditioned to be very practical. I won't say I'm a practical person, because that's just a characteristic that's been conditioned, but I think it's helpful to always leave with maybe just a few points in mind, like how can I practice to nourish a mind of true happiness and well-being? So what are some really important things to do? And there were 3 things that came to mind to me. First was just make coming back to presence a priority. You know, it's just like when we did the little reflection, what is it that brings you to that? If bringing you to presence, you can sit and meditate and quiet the mind. Even when the mind is a mess and it feels like it's all over the place, usually by the end of a meditation session, you can get up and feel better. So you may think, I'm not going to meditate this morning because I just can't. But I'm always surprised by, the fog does clear. So coming back to presence, and maybe the way we do that is through meditation. My son does it through fishing. Some people do it through hiking. Some people do it through surfing, listening to music, beautiful music. At this retreat, I happen to know, because Fred's my husband and I did the playlist, that we're going to listen to a lot of music on the 7-day retreat we have going on. And it's all very beautiful, kind of music that inspires, it opens your heart. So music can be very powerful as a way where you just sort of drop your thoughts and you just come, it touches something deeper in you. So whatever for you, whether it's nature, music, meditation, surfing, swimming, whatever, make that a priority, because we want to live from that place. If we're never there, we won't go there. But the more familiar we become with living from that deeper place, which is not from thoughts, it's from something much more solid and wise and deeper feeling than thoughts. Make that a priority. The second is develop a habit of watching your mind so that you're not carried away. So like we watched it in meditation this morning, and you kind of watch, oh, now this thought's coming up and that one. During the day, as you're moving through your day, just maybe develop a habit, which I've shared this a number of times, but since our teacher is my husband, early in our relationship, he'd go, how's your mind? How's your mind? It drove me crazy. It's like, it's fine. Stop asking me how my mind is. But he really meant well, and I eventually picked up that good habit myself. And it's a good thing to do, because like at any moment we stop and you look and you go, wow, there's a little bit of agitation there. And you don't really see it sometimes until it gets bigger. And there's also a Saturday night skit I loved from way back when either Jane Curtin or Lorraine Newman, one of them starts off her day and she's in her house, and there's like a little music in the background going, and then she goes to the cleaners and they've lost her laundry and it goes, and her whole day, it just kind of builds up. And by the end of the day, she walks in and she throws open the door in her house and there's a choir singing. And by this time, they're at full throttle. And she's like, shut up. And oftentimes, it doesn't get our attention until it gets to that shut up level. So watching your mind throughout the day, you can start to see like, oh, there's a little bit of irritation here that if I don't take care of this, and it's easy to take care of. Sometimes we can just drop it and say, I'm just going to do a gratitude practice. It'll take a minute. What's something I'm grateful for that happened today? And there's always something to be grateful for, and that can turn it on a dime. So learning to watch your mind, to check in. If you have a mindfulness timer on your phone, or you just can develop a habit of, ideally every 5 or 10 minutes. That's probably a high bar for us at the beginning, but to just throughout the day, How's my mind? Is it peaceful? Is it agitated? What am I feeding my mind? And then third, practice a diet of well-being and spirituality. Just asking yourself, is this wholesome or unwholesome? What I'm taking in. And again, it's not a hard and fast that and even some items, sometimes they're wholesome, sometimes they're unwholesome, you know. Too much healthy kale could make you sick at some point if you ate like a bushel of it or something. Too much of stimulation, period, could be unwholesome. Am I putting too much in my mind? You know, even if it's Buddhist books, there are people here, I won't name names, but who've read so many Buddhist books. Fred's like, you should all be enlightened by now. You've read so many books. And it's like, you don't really need another book. You know, what I need to do is clear the mind and touch the natural mind, not put more stuff in it. So again, books can be helpful. They're good guideposts, but how much is enough? And then take a tech sabbatical. Almost all of us can use a tech sabbatical. I really appreciate that Brian Hendrick, who teaches a lot here, if you email him on Sunday, you'll get his, I'm taking a tech, I don't know if he uses the word sabbatical, but you know, a tech-free day. And he and his wife and their family, they put down their phones, they turn them off. And then, you know, we have this feeling like if we don't look at our phones, we might be missing something. So I don't know how often people look at their phones, but I think it's pretty frequent. So what if you turned your phone off for 15 minutes or 30 minutes or a few hours, or even if you could take a day sometime? I think people find retreating here to be so wonderful because they come in and we take their phones away and we lock them in the office. And so you don't have access to your phone for, even if it's just a weekend retreat, people at the end of the weekend, they're like, God, that was so wonderful to feel like I was breaking that addiction with my phone for a few days and just to put that down because my mind then settled down, got clear. So lots to think about. And again, this is not a commercial, but maybe it sort of is for the intensive. Brian is leading the intensive. He's a wonderful teacher, and it will be focused on practicing. So we've been teaching and doing an overview of the Four Nutriments last week and this week, but you know, he'll be going through those over, I think, 8 weeks, and you'll have practices to do, you know, throughout the time, which that type of approach really helps it sink in. So, and it's all online. It's all on Zoom. You don't have to show up anywhere physically, so even if you're traveling over the summer, you can still participate. So we think this is a really important topic. We're going to make it into a self-paced course eventually too, because we are creating, you know, we have the choice, we have the power to create our own happiness or unhappiness based on how we consume, which is wonderful. Because it's not up to somebody out there to control our happiness. It's up to us and our choices. So this is a really important topic. And so thank you for your attention. Loved having the opportunity to see everyone and to talk about this topic, and we'll end.